Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where we take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the player supplement Drizzt's Travelogue of Everything Volume 2, designed by Lucas Anderson with Jack Weighill, Joe Wilson, Ukulele Bard, Basil, Wright, StickyHunter, VJ Harris, Matthew Jarmak, and Andrew Welker for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you are interested in a sponsored review, you can reach me via email, Twitter, or Discord, or my submission form at roguewatson.com. And if you enjoy the content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Hopefully you've seen my review for Drizzt. That's really hard to say, by the way. Drizzt, I think it's Drizzt is how I'm pronouncing it. But when you add a apostrophe S to it, boy, that's a problem. Drizzt's Travelogue of Everything, Volume 1, which was one of my favorite products that I reviewed in 2022. It was in my top 10 list. I believe it was in the top 5. Just a really well-designed, well-created, player-focused supplement that included mainly a whole bunch of new subclass options, as well as a lot of cool new magic items and some supplemental rules. It's kind of like, a one-stop shop for a 100-page supplement. Now we got Volume 2 in 2023, which I'm happy to say I think is just as good as Volume 1. And in fact, I'm actually even more impressed because the designer didn't say, well, let's just do more of everything we did in Volume 1. Granted, subclasses is still the majority of what you're going to get here. But like instead of getting magic items like we did in Volume 1, we get spells in Volume 2, as well as new ancestries, which I don't believe we got in Volume 1. So you get some different content this time around, which is, I think, very much appreciated. But it's still in that same really professional layout style, where we get, I think it's original art for all the characters and classes that are included here. It's a very, very impressive product. I like the way it looks, but more importantly, I like the actual content that's included here. Even as somebody who doesn't necessarily use a lot of player-focused third-party content, I use a lot of adventure stuff for sure. But it takes a lot, because at this stage, late in 5e's development, we've got a lot of official classes and subclasses to work with already. So you really have to do something interesting to warrant me taking a deeper look at it. And especially in my case, I'm looking at subclasses all the time through these reviews. So it's kind of even a higher bar than normal, because I've seen just about everything a lot of really, really good designers can come up with. So can you impress me with these subclasses? And again, I'm happy to say that, yeah, I think for the most part, they're not all like incredibly interesting, but I think they nail their themes, and some of them are very, very interesting, to where, once again, like Volume 1, I think this has a collection of some of my favorite subclasses. It also has a new class in the Alchemist. So if you recall, Volume 1 added the Tactician class with its own subclasses, which was inspired, I believe, by the 4E Warlord. The Alchemist here, I know that's like I think it's a Pathfinder class. I don't know if that's a previous D&D class. Somebody can, I'm sure, alert me to that in the comments. But I do know that Alchemist is a subclass of Artificer. So, in fact, in our Rime of the Frostmaiden, we have a character who is playing an Alchemist Artificer. So I was thinking, well, why do we need an Alchemist? Well, I will show that to you when we get to it. But I think it does a pretty good job of making it fairly simple, yet interestingly enough. Like, it has just one simple thing. It's like, okay, this is your whole thing. And that's probably worth having a class for. And then also, when you get to all the subclasses, then I'm like, okay, I can see how you can then flavor this overall class into different specific play styles. So in fact, I think I enjoy the Alchemist more than the Tactician from Volume 1, which might elevate this entire thing a little bit higher. I can't necessarily do a deep dive into each individual one of these elements like I would with a smaller product, because we're going to try to get through 100 pages here, but I will try to do my best of giving you kind of the broad strokes here. Chapter 1 gives us new ancestries / races / species. I really like ancestry, I think, as the best terminology here. I don't know why WotC isn't going with that. Maybe because Ancestry, I think, is what Paizo uses for Pathfinder, but I think they just need to swallow their pride and be like, yeah, this is the best. It just sounds cool and sounds more fantasy, like Ancestry. Like that works so much better than anything else we've come up with, I think. Just go with that. So I appreciate the Ancestry here. It adds Gnolls, Mass Stars, Robos, and Virtus, which are, well, Gnolls are the hyena folks, which are normally evil. I like this cheery fellow here. This is just, hey, what if Gnolls weren't like, they broke away from their demon roots and you could just be a normal Gnoll person? Like, okay, fine. The Mastars are dog people, which my heart goes out to the furries out there, because I think D&D, especially Forgotten Realms, really doesn't have a good a lot of anthropomorphic races, I guess. I think we are races, ancestries. I think we have the rabbit folk who had it in Witchlight, and then I guess turtles, although they're not literally furry, but they are at least anthropomorphic humanoid animal things. Tabaxi, I guess, would be the best one to get. So I appreciate that we get kind of the dog version. I really like anthropomorphic characters in my fantasy game, so I'm a big fan of that. And I think it's got some fun abilities where you can use their howl, almost like a channel divinity, where they have a howl they can use, and you can kind of choose either to make it an inspiring howl or a frightening howl, and that, they've got a good sniffer and all that. It's kind of funny. The robots are a little goofier. I could see a lot of demons being like, no, I'm not doing that. I appreciate that Eberron has the Warforged, but it's very deeply tied into that universe and that world. Whereas Robos is just kind of like, hey, what if people could make robots and you were a robot, and kind of a robot ass looking robot too, not even like a necessarily a real one that could like pass for humanoid, for example. So that's a little goofy for me, but sure, it's fun. They've got a little robot Swiss Army arm that can kind of change to different things, like not necessarily like a Mega Man thing, but different like tools and all that. So that's kind of fun. And then plant folk, yes, that's definitely something we need. I think is somebody who can be some kind of sentient humanoid plant creature. So none of these are insanely like, oh wow, that's so interesting. But I don't know if we necessarily need that, again, this late in D&D's life cycle. And yet what this does is provide things that I normally haven't seen too often before. Like, yeah, I don't see a lot of people making straight up robots, or oddly enough, even straight plant folk either. It's usually some kind of, I don't know, dryad thing or something that has like Fae background. So that's pretty interesting, I think. Chapter 2, which, and I don't think we got ancestries in volume 1 either, so I appreciate getting some in volume 2. So chapter 2 is the majority of what you're going to get here, which, I mean, how many pages is this? The new subclasses are from, well, we'll Alchemist first. So the subclasses will go from page 28 to 74, so that is the majority of what you're going to get here. So if you're not interested in the subclasses, these travelogues of everything maybe won't be your jam, but I think if you are interested, you're going to get a lot of enjoyment out of this. The Alchemist is the new class. The Alchemist is a kind of a mid-range D8. It is a spellcaster, but it specifically uses the variant spell point rules from the Dungeon Master's Guide versus spell slots, and it's used that way because when they cast spells, they can create potions. Literally, they just turn their spells into their potions. That's it. That's the whole thing. And at first I was like, okay, that's kind of lame. But then as I got to thinking about it, I was like, actually, yeah, I can see where that would be incredibly helpful and useful. And it's balanced because it doesn't use your stats if you give it to somebody else. Because that's the first thing I thought of, is like, well, the whole benefit to this, I mean, I guess you could pre-do spell. Like, what's the point? Like, it still takes you, time to do everything, concentration, all that comes into play. So the big advantage here would be if you could give somebody, you cast haste, and you give that to your, barbarian to drink, and then they can cast haste. That is true. It still has to follow the concentration rules. Anything that involves saving throws or spell attacks involve a DC. The drinkers, the imbibers, intelligence check. So it actually scales off their thing. So probably best to give out buffs versus like letting your barbarian cast fireball, for example, because it would scale off their intelligence when it comes to the saves and things. So I thought that was an interesting way of balancing it out. And I just like the spell point system in general. I think that works better. I would probably even use that as a baseline versus spell slots for all my spellcasters, but I like that it's used here specifically because it does free up, I think, make it a little bit easier to make different kind of potions at different costs versus having to worry about the spell slots completely. And then at higher levels, you can do things like get a refund for any potions you make and turn them back into spell points essentially. You do get your subclass at, and really the baseline is that's pretty much it. It's just that you're turning spells into potions, but it's any spells. And I will say, because it is I think it's a primary spell. It's hard. It's honestly hard to tell based on when you get to 9th level. So yeah, it's a full spellcaster. You also get your own spells. So because you're a full spellcaster, the actual class abilities are always going to be maybe not quite as fulfilling as non-spellcasters, because you got spells to rely on. In this case, you actually have all these new alchemist spells, which are provided in a later chapter, which I believe are like 20 something, and a lot of them are specifically like alchemy stuff. It's like throwing grenades, and you could flavor it easily like that, where it's like noxious grenades and charming things and all that. So a lot of your power doesn't come from this, it comes from your spells, in other words. The subclasses, we get 5 of them real quickly. There is the Creator, Pursuit of the Creator, which allows you to craft a creature using your alchemy, which I think is very appropriate, kind of creating like a it doesn't really use the word homunculus or golem, but I'm thinking kind of that kind of creature. And I love that very later on at 6th level, you can give it a whole bunch of cool abilities and different traits and things, which is neat. Another one is the Pursuit of the Healer, which allows you to, just be a good healer, I guess. You can use a bonus action to basically let other people short rest in the middle of combat, like have them reroll their hit dice and things like that. Longevity kind of turns you into a hybrid monk, where you get like armor bonuses and unarmed strikes at the same time as using your potions. I thought that was a really interesting class. I just didn't expect that to go like half monk with one. You always expect at least one subclass to go more fightery, and I didn't expect this one to go specifically with monk, and how it uses unarmed strikes and you'll do force damage, and you get this like baseline armor and all this interesting things. Mixologist allows, this one is probably the one that's closer to the alchemist artificer, that allows you to take a potion you've made and turn it into some other thing. And you have to roll I think you roll 2 dice and maybe choose the better one. I forget how that works. And then you get to either turn it into like a grenade or a protection thing or a healing thing. So that one's kind of tricky, because I was like, well, why wouldn't I just use the potion that I made? But I guess this gives you more options. But then later on, when you level up at 6th level, you don't have to spend a potion you've already made. You can just make one of these, which I think that is more in line with how the alchemist artificer operates. But also it's an interesting way to turn low level spells into useful things, I suppose. Necrosis allows you to apply any brewed spells of potions into weapons, which is kind of a hybrid fighter, but also you could, I think, apply it to maybe other people's weapons and things, and then it procs off there. It does increased poison damage and all these different things. And then the Transmuter is very much what my dear Alchemist Artificer has flavored his character as in our Rime of the Frostmaiden campaign, which is you're transforming. It's the Full Metal Alchemist thing. You're always having to transform energy from one thing to another into different effects. So in this case, you can like turn the ground into different things. Like literally, it's how this Raymond has roleplayed his character as being able to like churn the ground, placing his hands on the ground and like churning it up and all that. Absolutely perfect. I thought that was very thematic and cool. And then this lists all the spells you can use the Alchemist, which a lot of them are new spells. So pretty cool. And I love the design notes, by the way, at the end that really explain like, hey, here's where I'm coming from this class, how I designed it, what shares it apart, and basically how the balance system works. I love anytime a designer gives me specifically new content like this to give me their kind of behind the scenes notes and thinking, because it allows me in thinking in my head and arguing to myself, well, why'd you make this decision? Why'd you do that? And I can read it and like, okay, I get it. I may not necessarily agree with it for everything, but I appreciate being able to have that argument while reading it. Then we get, so that was 5 subclasses for the Alchemist, by the way. Then we get over 30 subclasses for all the other classes, including the Tactician, which was introduced in Volume 1 of Drizzt Travelogue to Everything. So that is a total of 14 classes that get subclasses. All of them get 2, and a couple of them get 3, because I believe it revises some of the subclasses, which it did that in Volume 1 as well. So that's not even including the 5 subclasses for the Alchemist. Real quickly, I'll go through some of my favorites to highlight, and one of them is actually this first one, which is the Puppeteer Artificer. I thought that was a really cool idea to have these wooden dolls you can create. Also, kind of, you could go with some creepy stuff for them. You can give them all these interesting like traits and abilities, and you could get multiple ones. And it just, I love the way you get the thing at the beginning, the cool thing, and then it gets more powerful as you level up. And just a neat idea that I'd never seen before, where it's like, and not necessarily a pet class, but it's like you have a bunch of little pets you can create eventually, and then do all these different things with them. So that was a neat idea. It's Karakuri is the name of the little dolls, I guess you can make. And the other Artificer Temporal Tinker is also a cool idea. You know, there's a lot of like chrono mages, like inspired from like Final Fantasy Tactics and things. In this case, you're an artificer. You've got a like time machine on your wristband or something, and you're actually using a device to change time. And I thought that was actually a cool twist on it for sure. Skipping to the Bard, we've got the College of Colors. This is a neat idea where I like bards that are where you're using the term bard as just somebody who is an artsy fartsy type who uses magic in creative ways, instead of just necessarily music. For example, to use another one of our class examples from Rime of the Frost Maiden, one of my players is playing a bard who is solely like a writer, which I think is a cool idea. In this case, this is a bard who is solely a painter, or just somebody who is interested in art, and that is manifested by being able to choose a certain color. There's literally a color magic table, and then you can paint certain blocks on the battlefield. This one could be a little tricky to try and suss out, but what I understood is you can create a number of blocks on the battlefield, and then you're essentially painting, your picture. They all have to be adjacent to each other. So you're drawing a zone, essentially, and the zone, I think, can scale for certain stats. And then that zone can be different things depending on what kind of color you've got. So it could be just it slows everything down, or it provides some buffs, or it does like constant fire damage or something. And I thought that was a really interesting take on being able to make it very visually distinct, is like just paint a whole part of the battlefield and then it comes to life like around you. That's very, very nifty. I also like the Scorn one, which is instead of giving Bardic Inspiration to your allies, you give Bardic Disdain to your enemies, and you're just a complete asshole to others. And this is a great picture. All these pictures are fabulous, by the way. It really, really cool that we get original artwork for all these different character classes, and it just shows like such a huge variety in styles. And I know previously I had maybe even complained about that, but I think in this case, especially showing all these wildly different character types, it fits really, really well, and it works. I think as visually a lot of fun to look at and be able to see examples of those character types. Going to the Titan Slayer for Fighter. Fighter is a difficult one to make cool subclasses for. And yet this one is very cool. It reminds me of Monster Hunter in a lot of ways, or just kind of any JRPG hero that has a giant, comically oversized weapon. In this case, you can make a comically oversized weapon called a Titan weapon, and it has all these increased stats. It increases the die, how much damage it does, and you gain special abilities you can do with that weapon. So live out your JRPG dreams or Monster Hunter dreams, and you could just use bows, whatever else, just these giant weapons. I think is very cool in flavor, and I would look forward to certainly doing something like that. The Green Warden, I love this idea for a ranger. You can transform parts of your body into different animal parts. So you're like a partial, oh man, who's that Marvel character? Reptile, I guess. You can change body parts into different dinosaur bits. So you're like a partial shapeshifter. You're not quite, which I think is a cool idea because the druid is the full shapeshifter. So why not the ranger be the partial shapeshifter? So you can turn your skin into the scales of the crocodile to get more AC. You got the leap of the grasshopper. You can jump farther. You can have arms of the bear because you have a right to bear arms. Damn it! I told myself I wouldn't make that joke and I made it. I'm sorry. But I absolutely love this ranger so much. I'm a big fan of shapeshifting, and I think that would be a really, really fun class to play, so I enjoy that one quite a bit. Kind of reminded me of Wildcrats, by the way, for all you parents out there, or just if you enjoy children's programming on PBS, where they can turn a different creature powers. I thought that was neat. I also really enjoy, and honestly, I'm skipping through, but there's a lot of really fun stuff in here. I'm just trying to highlight my favorite ones. The Cataclysm for Warlock is such an interesting idea. So in this case, your patron is a force of catastrophe, and your abilities are basically like natural disasters. So you invoke like earthquakes or wildfires or hurricanes, and just you portent like these natural disasters. Like that is, or like the coming of some great, creature. I thought that was a really cool idea, and it's some awesome like role-playing opportunities as well that you could utilize with this. That was something that I really had never thought of. And not only did I think that was a neat idea, but I thought the abilities to go with it are very cool, right? At first ability, you can invoke all these different, creepy things that happen around you and, portend some kind of terrible thing to happen. So that was a really neat effect. So huge, real thumbs up on a lot of these subclasses, some really fun ideas. It also revises existing ones, I believe. I forgot which ones Volume 1 did. There were 2 of them, and this one revises another 2, where it goes back and tries to fix some of them. In this case, it's Assassin Rogue and the War Magic Wizard. The War Magic Wizard gets Arcane Gambits, which are essentially close to like Battle Master maneuvers. There's kind of other cool abilities you can do with your own resource system. In this case, Gambit points instead of whatever the Battle Masters are called, maneuver points or something. And then Assassin Rogue gains like extra poison damage, increased critical hits, like things that are actually going to come into play in combat in addition to just having the advantage on surprise rounds or something. So both of those are definitely thumbs up for subclasses that are generally considered pretty lame and underpowered compared to other ones. And I really appreciate the designers doing this. Spells, I think, are a big thumbs up as well. We get a bunch of new spells that have to do with the alchemy. As I mentioned, that's where a lot of your new power is coming from. So you'll get, smoke bombs, bee bombs, armor skin, caustic things, charming, grenades and all these. And then it also gives nearly 30 revise spells. So in the same way that we revise some of these subclasses, this attempts to revise some of the existing spells, which is a bold choice because I do think a lot of spells probably need some work. I think, off the top of my head, I bet any of you watching this could probably name, a handful of spells. You're like, yeah, nobody in my group would use these, or like we used it once when we were first playing and like never again because it just doesn't keep up with other spells that are just better, do the thing better at this level or whatever. And what this attempts to basically buff all of these spells. It doesn't attempt to take ones and pull them back, like, maybe I don't think it is. Is Silvery Barbs in here? No. Okay, make sure I said that. So with this, I believe, I was skimming through all these, but with this, I think it takes all of them that are underutilized. Yeah, instead it says at the beginning, are incredibly lackluster, and then buffs them, so makes them a little bit more attractive. It'd be interesting, I think, if you do the opposite. There are a few spells that maybe they need to be backpedaled a little bit, but also, in terms of balance, it is probably better to just buff up bad stuff rather than nerf the really good stuff, so make your other things more attractive for the players to use. So for some examples, and I don't think it does it too much, too. I don't think it tries to swing the pendulum too far in the other direction. Like Stone Skin, for example, still does everything that Stone Skin does, but instead of consuming 100 gold worth of diamonds every time, it just requires you to have one of those once. You don't have to consume it every time. So that's a pretty easy fix, and that might be something that a lot of players just didn't realize. Like, oh, well, I'm not going to cast this spell because I'm not going to spend 100 gold to cast it every single time, to something our Barbarian can do, just as their baseline. Like, and it's a 4th level spell. Like, yeah, I get it. So I think that's a way more fair. You spend it once, and then you don't have to spend it again. Crown of Madness is another example where you no longer have to spend your action maintaining control of them, which used to be the case, or is the case in the original Crown of Madness. In this case, you still have to cast the spell once, but then that effect is on them, and then they just have to repeat the saving throw. Also on that one, this changes it to it's one creature, not necessarily one humanoid, because that's also very limiting for players. Obviously, as a DM, you can use it all day long because your players are almost all humanoids. But as a player, a spell like that is a lot more limiting when it's only humanoids. And that's the other example. Witch Bolt. I wrote down a couple examples, so I gotta highlight them. Witch Bolt is very famously not a great spell because it does. I mean, the 1d12 is fine, but then you have to do the hit. You have to make the attack roll, and then you have to keep using your action, just keep on doing that attack roll. And there's just usually other better things you can do, and it's a concentration spell, so you could lose it even though you have to make the action every time. What this tries to fix is say, okay, you cast the spell once, you hit them. It's still concentration, but now it's a bonus action to keep hitting them, rather than having to use your action to do it. So you can still use your other action to do other attacks or other spells or things, which I think is a lot more effective and makes that spell a lot more attractive. In that case, it's almost more of a spiritual weapon. I don't remember if spiritual weapon actually requires concentration or not. Maybe it doesn't. But in any case, that makes Witch Bolt a little bit more attractive. So I'd appreciate, honestly, I think the revised spells is a great idea. It's really cool to see, and I think for the most part they do a good job of making the spells just slightly better without overcorrecting too much, which would be the tendency that I would probably have, if we're being honest. And then finally, Chapter 4 has some DM tools. Volume 1 had these as well. This one has some expanded notes on cooking. I especially like all the tables for different like biomes of cooking menu samples, in case your people are really enjoying the Game of Thrones style of reading about every stupid meal that every character ever eats, then you've got all these different menu options there. What I really like are these mythic heroics, which give the players, so there's a mythic system for like big bad bosses. I believe they come from the Theros book, where when you defeat them, they basically regenerate all their health, and then they gain like this new super attack, and they become like, you know, it's a second stage boss fight thing. This kind of applies that to the player characters in an interesting way, where if they drop to 0 hit points, if you want to play with this variant system, then they would be able to enter a mythic heroic mode where they regain a certain amount of hit points, not all their hit points, but some. And then they get all these new abilities depending on their class, and it lists different abilities for all their classes, and really lets you like go ham and suddenly just turn into Super Saiyan mode. Basically, you do all your things better. Anything your class can do, you just start doing that better, and you have all these different abilities. The downside is if you reach 0 hit points again while you're under these effects, which I forget how long that lasts, forgive me, for 1 minute or until they drop to 0 hit points. If you drop to 0 hit points again during this time, you automatically accrue a death save. I think it's a very interesting system. I would probably not, and it does mention the fact that, hey, if you're using this, you need to up your challenge level up, because this obviously makes the players a lot more stronger. I would probably limit this to certain like crazy big things happen. For example, in Tomb of the Nine Gods for the Tomb of Annihilation event, maybe when the trickster gods are possessing you or something, that you can enter this kind of mode. Or when at the end of Storm King's Thunder, instead of becoming giant sized, maybe you get these mythic traits or something, but to where it's a very limited, or maybe it's a reward that you get for a quest or an item that gives you or something. So it wouldn't be like a baseline feature necessarily, but it's an interesting idea, I think, to give your players this like super powerful mode that only unlocks if they hit 0 hit points, or it could be a surprise that, you know, when they hit 0 hit points, it unlocks this mode. It also mentions the fact it doesn't happen until 5th level. So I think it's pretty cool, though. It's a very neat idea, and that's worthy of being an optional DM tool for sure. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Drizzt's Travelogue of Everything Volume 2. Pro, the new Alchemist class, which includes 5 subclasses. I really enjoyed that class. It wasn't, it didn't try to reinvent like a whole alchemy system. Instead, it basically just said, hey, you're a full spellcaster. You've got a lot of new alchemy spells, and then you can turn any of those spells into potions, and that just ups your versatility when it comes to passing out spells to people. So fine, that works well, and I think all the subclasses are pretty interesting and allow you to go down very specific roles and paths. Pro, over 30 subclasses for all 14 classes. That includes the Tactician from Volume 1, and I honestly I loved a lot of these subclasses. Very few of them were like, that's fine, but a lot of them were like, oh, this is very cool, and then you just saw my favorite ones where I was like, this is very cool. Pro, over a dozen new alchemy-themed spells to go along with the Alchemist class. Pro, nearly 30 revised and rebalanced spells, which I thought was very impressive to be able to buff some very lackluster spells that nobody uses. Everybody kind of agrees, like, yeah, these aren't really that exciting for those reasons. Interesting mythic heroics optional rules. I loved that. Again, I probably wouldn't include it as a baseline, but it was a neat idea to give your players a super mode that they enter if they reach 0 hit points, but like with kind of a danger where if you go down again, now you're automatically accruing death saves. And Pro, beautiful character art with professional layout, plus Drizzt's fun commentary. He comments throughout these entire books, just like Volume 1, which I really appreciate. And I expected that to be the case, because that was the case with Volume 1. Cons, I have nothing. Like, honestly, I thought this was a fantastic book and a worthy sequel of the original. In fact, my verdict, the rare sequel that's just as good, if not better, than the original. Volume 2 complements its older brother with even more interesting subclass options, smartly updated spells, and the all-new alchemy class. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Thank you.